Next time we need to prime the first question for delegates. Who's used sustainable transport to get here? And space, which is what I'm really going to talk about today, is kind of almost the opposite of sustainable travel in many ways. You burn through vast amounts of resource to get something up into space. But there is actually a connection, which I'll come back to a little bit later on. I'm going to leave that there dangling so that you maybe wonder what the connection could be. I also, just to say, discovered that you can use animated GIFs as the background in slides. So this is very easy to do, and it instantly makes your slides look, oh, so whizzy, so good.
So do you have a mic?
Sorry, we don't have a mic in here. I'll just try to project. Can you hear me okay now? Good. I'll try and keep it at that volume. So I'm going to talk about three things here today. I'm going to talk about how space is becoming really, really big. There's a lot of stuff going on around space applications, around getting stuff into space, and why that might be a big deal for us. I'm going to talk about some of the things that perhaps we might once upon a time have thought that the UK was a world leader in, which maybe we've kind of drifted away from, but actually perhaps this is our moment, this is our opportunity. This is the only time I'm going to say the word Brexit in this talk, and that is just to say that I'm not going to talk about Brexit, so you can breathe a sigh of relief at this point. I'm also going to dangle a question, actually. If we manage to get our act together and really start doing a lot of space-related stuff, where could that take us? Where could that take us, not next year or the year after, but where could that take us in maybe 5 to 10 years? So, without further ado, when we talk about the way that technology is going, the way that industries are going, the way that education is going right now, we hear an awful lot of talk about the so-called fourth industrial revolution. And that tends to be in terms of things like robotics, in terms of artificial intelligence, maybe in terms of things like bioengineering. I'm going to talk about it in the context of space. It's not a metaphor. I'm going to talk about space travel, space applications. And I think it's actually one of the most profound examples of how fourth industrial revolution could transform not just individual people's lives, but create whole new industries. And here's an example that's not space related, but I think is quite fascinating. We talked about those technologies like AI, like robotics, which are becoming bigger and bigger in our lives. Would you rather have Hyperloop or HS2? There's an interesting question. How much is it worth investing in something like Hyperloop, which is essentially like a country-sized version of the London Underground, shooting high-speed trains at speeds of hundreds of kilometres an hour? Would you take a punt on that if you were an investor? And you don't have to answer that question, actually, because that is exactly what a whole bunch of high net worth individuals and venture capital funds are doing right now. We might never see a UK Hyperloop. We might never see that. But this particular company, Hyperloop One, which Richard Branson is heavily involved with through his Virgin Group, would like to do that. So they would like to get the journey time from Cambridge to London down to 9 minutes. Wouldn't that be good? Wouldn't that be good? When you get on your train later on, just picture that, if it's not delayed. So that's an example of something which, if you'd said, I don't know, a couple of years ago, will we be seriously talking about this? And I think most people would have said, yeah, come on, you know, this is the sort of thing I've read about in science fiction stories. I don't think we're ever going to do anything like this. And there's a similar conversation for me around quite a bunch of things that you could actually probably lift wholesale from science fiction. So, for example, asteroid mining. You might say, yeah, you know, really, is asteroid mining, is that actually, in 2018, is that a thing? You can go to a website called planetaryresources.com, which is a VC-funded asteroid mining company. So they're right now taking applications. So if anybody fancies a bit of a career change, we'll try something a little bit different, really can go to planetaryresources.com and click the Apply Now button. I'd like to be an asteroid miner. The truth is, you would probably be working on a robot, and actually the robot is the thing that will be sent up to do the asteroid mining. Maybe a few lucky individuals will get to go along with the robots to fix them when they go wrong. But similarly, quite a few of these sort of archetypal near-future careers, like DNA editor, they're actually creeping up on us. And in fact, if you go onto something like LinkedIn Jobs or Indeed, you will see there are jobs right now for DNA editors. If you search for CRISPR-Cas9, it's not all R&D projects, it's not all in the labs. Some of those things have now made the leap into spin-outs, into startups, and the very early stage companies that a lot of you either have right now in your science parks or will be coming into your science parks maybe in the next couple of years. So I think this is a hugely exciting time to be in the business of enterprise, to be in the business of research and innovation. And this is all the stuff that comes with the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is a talking point. These things are all actually happening. They're creeping up on us, and there'll come a point when they're all around us, and we'll look back and we'll say, when did that happen? When did that happen? I don't remember an inflection point. I don't remember a point where everything changed. But, when did we get the robot security guard? That's a few years ago now, wasn't it? I've just gotten used to it. So, a few of these things are coming along. In a space context, who knows what this is? Anybody recognise these? Put your hand up if you recognise these rockets. So a few of you do. These are the rockets that Elon Musk's SpaceX company has been building. These rockets are different to other rockets. Most rockets, you shoot them off up into space and wave goodbye to them. That's it. Gone. So what does that rocket cost? Well, these ones cost about $60 million. We'll fly it up into space. It will figuratively, if not literally, go boom, and that's it. If you want to launch something else into space, that's another $60 million. And that's just the cost of building the rocket. Doing all of the other stuff, the operational stuff, to get it up there, the people, the facilities, the ground stations, all of that costs as well. But the rocket itself, what if you could land it and fly it again? Ooh, suddenly it doesn't cost $60 million plus every time you want to put stuff into space. So SpaceX have now been doing this, and those of you that put your hand up just now will know this. They've been doing this now for, it's getting on for 3 years, and they've slowly been taking over the space launch business. It's actually becoming quite hard for people to compete with them. So these rockets change everything. They make it possible to get stuff into space, potentially up to 99% cheaper than before. So some of you have tenants who are in satellite applications, space applications like Earth observation. All of a sudden, the cost of getting your stuff into space, and also potentially people, is going right down. So this is a very exciting time. This is kind of how we maybe imagined that space travel would work. And then you watch a NASA video, and you see the bits of spacecraft tumbling down to burn up as they re-enter the atmosphere. We're not doing that. We're reusing it. So we're launching it, we're landing it, and we're refurbishing and repeating it. And our aim is to get that down to 24 hours. So we get the thing up there. A day later, we can fly it again, which is pretty exciting. And that means that all of a sudden, a lot of things that would have seemed difficult or impossible or impossibly expensive start to become quite attractive. And for me, what that means is, in this country, in a very real sense, we sort of pressed pause on the UK space programme, around about 1971, there was a rocket called Blue Streak, which you can go and see. You can go and see the last surviving Blue Streak at the Space Centre in Leicester, and it's it's a talking point for groups of school kids. So once upon a time we did this kind of thing in the UK, not in California. Not in California. We actually did this sort of thing in the UK. But like I say, around about 1971, we pressed pause on that, and we said we'll throw in our lot with the European Space Agency, as it became. And so here we are. But we do still make things. We still make satellites. And pretty soon, we're going to be making rockets and launching them from the UK. So this is a rocket called Electron, which Lockheed Martin have taken a big stake in. And Lockheed Martin are one of the key tenants for the UK's first spaceport, which will be on the very far north of Scotland. If anybody been to Cape Wrath? That's a bit of a random thing. I knew there'd be one. So it's not got too many amenities, right? Is basically a windswept heath in the middle of nowhere, which is perfect for launching a rocket, because if it blows up, you don't want to have any people anywhere nearby. You want to keep people a long way away. So with private investment and government support, and this is just announced this summer, the vertical launch facility in the far north of Scotland has already got over £40 million of investment. So that thing that seemed like science fiction actually will be built. This will happen, and it will probably happen in the next couple of years. So again, those of you who have tenants who are in space applications, particularly anybody who's involved in satellites, all of a sudden you can launch your satellite from the UK. Why is that important? Not for some jingoistic flag-waving reason, but because right now you have to send it to the other side of the planet. You have to send it to French Guiana to hitch a lift on a European Space Agency Ariane launch, or you have to send it to Kazakhstan to hitch a lift on a Russian launch. This means that you just need to send it up the road. And actually, a lot of UK satellites are built in and around the Glasgow area. It turns out Glasgow is a real nexus of satellite building activity. You have companies like Clyde Space, Spire and Alba all operating out of the Glasgow area. Just imagine if you could just pop your satellite in the back of the lorry and take it up to the other end of the country. I'm not going to say anything about Scottish independence here either, by the way. So just imagine if you could do that. But if you can read the text though, I know it's a bit small if you're at the back. Already we make nearly half of the small satellites in the world. So in 1971 we pressed pause on launching them, sending them up into space. But we are making them, and we're making them in huge quantities. And these are the satellites that are kind of yay big or smaller, so they're kind of fridge-sized satellites. Turns out there's a lot of demand for that. This particular one is a satellite that shoots a net out to catch space debris. So this is a great bit of innovation, which actually, like I say, this is built in the UK. This is built by a team in Glasgow. Shoots out a net, catch space debris that's floating around, bits of things that have bumped into each other, so they can then be dragged down to burn up on re-entry, to get that stuff out of the way. If you're trying to do stuff in space and something hits you, boom, you're in big trouble, because even a very tiny object can punch a great big hole in whatever you're trying to send up there. So the idea that you can potentially, in just a couple of years, build it and launch it in the UK, actually, and this is where maybe you have to blink if this seemed a little bit like science fiction, all of a sudden it's sounding like good business sense. It's sounding like it might be something that would be a no-brainer if you're in the industry. There is a catch though. The UK is not the ideal place to launch things from. So it's very good for polar orbits, and if you want to get a bit more variety, then actually you are better off launching from the tropics. But I think the idea that this is something whose time has now come is very interesting. Something else that's happening, it's not got quite so much money yet. I think the government's put a a couple of million into a fund to see what can happen around horizontal takeoff and landing. So this is, I talked about Richard Branson before. This is Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic space plane. It's actually, the space plane is a bit in the middle, and it's carried up into the air by what's essentially two big planes glued together. And where the two planes meet in the middle, the little space plane dangles. Why would this be important? What would this be used for? So one of the places that you might see this is at Newquay Airport, which is one of the sites that would like to be a horizontal spaceport, horizontal takeoff and landing spaceport. Just imagine now Richard Branson with his surfboard and a toothy grin at Newquay Airport saying, right, I've been surfing now, I'm just going to go for a bit of space tourism. And again, this is something which is going to happen in the next couple of years. Branson himself wants to be one of the first passengers, and I'm not going to say anything here about delayed train journeys and experiences of Virgin West Coast, but he wants to do that. That has been in the making for around 10 years now. So again, if you look around, if you Google around Virgin Galactic, you'll see this is something they've been building up to, and we might well find, maybe not in the next couple of years because there's a bit more proofing to be done, but we may well find, you go down to Cornwall on holiday and the question comes up, well, what do you think? Shall we give it a go? It will fly you up to the edge of space, you'll get to experience weightlessness, you'll get to be like an astronaut, and then it will fly you back down again. Would you do it? Put your hand up if you do it. Oh, you're an adventurous lot. This is good. So, the truth is actually probably that won't fly from Newquay. The thing that they're talking about flying from Newquay is a bit more down to earth, it's a bit more boring. And what it is essentially a jumbo jet, a 747, that has a rocket slung under a wing. So instead of having to fire the rocket straight up, we'll fly the jet up and then we'll just release the rocket when you get high enough, but there probably won't be any people on it. So if I was a betting man, I'd love to think that will fly from Newquay, but I think probably, at least at first, it will be the jumbo jet with the rocket with the satellite on the nose. Maybe we'll get lucky though, and wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great to do that? Wouldn't it be wonderful? There are a few other locations that have been suggested, and they have a characteristic in common. They have very long runways, and I don't know who remembers the V-bombers. This is another bit of sort of retro futurism. Who remembers the Vulcans? The truth was there were only a few runways they could take off and land. They're still around. They're still around, and they're ideal for this sort of application. So that's why there's a whole bunch of people, and there may indeed be someone for one of those sites here today. If there is, catch me at the coffee break, who's planning similar horizontal takeoff and landing opportunities. So where do we fit in? I'm from JISC. We run something called the Janet Network, so we're the internet service provider for research and education. And increasingly we're working with science parks to see how we can connect the R&D, the research and innovation that happens at science parks, with the institutions that are often co-located with them, with the industrial collaborators on perhaps the other side of the country. So a very good example of this, I used to work at Loughborough University, part of their science park operation, and we ran a supercomputer centre, and we connected Rolls-Royce up through Janet. This is before I joined JISC. We connected Rolls-Royce up through Janet to use the supercomputer centre, and there were so many synergies there. There were so many synergies. It actually saved them money compared to what they were doing before, which I was very pleased with. So our presence right now in science parks actually encompasses quite a lot of the UK space clusters. So our major site at Harwell, big presence at Goonhilly. We've just put a connection in down at Culham. This is, for me, I think Janet is really well placed to be something like the digital nervous system for this emerging second generation UK space industry. So 8,500 kilometres of optical fibre, we can light that, we can do anything with that. And one particular thing that speaks very nicely to space, although I put raw speed up here, 400 gigabits a second is pretty good if you're used to business broadband in a rented science park unit. That's pretty good, but low latency communications is probably the key for space. So if I send the message up into space, I get a reply back as quickly as possible. I don't have to wait, I don't have to have it bounce around for ages. So we think that there's a lot of potential there. And we'd love to talk to you about that. So I'll be around later, and a couple of my colleagues are here too. Come and grab me over coffee. But before I shut up, I wanted to leave you with some thoughts about where this could all take us. So let's think about, I call this originally the known unknowns, but really they're opportunities. If we can get lots of people into space, well, this is completely new. There have only, in the history of the human race, there have only been a few hundred people who've been into space. It's just a few hundred, but there will be millions, and we'll need to feed them. It'll be quite important, particularly if you end up, let's say, as a Martian colonist, which will happen. You'll need to eat. Folk in science parks will be sat there saying, okay, we've had some small-scale experiments on the International Space Station. We've grown a few lettuces and things like that. How do we scale that up? How do we feed a town? How do we feed a city? So all of those sorts of questions. But also, how do we make stuff? Because it's very expensive and time-consuming to get things that you make on Earth, off Earth, to other places. And there's a particular challenge there, which is smelting. If anybody knows smelting, it's reliant on gravity. So how do we do that in a low G or zero G environment? We want to separate out the constituents of the ore when we put it in the smelter. How is that going to work? There's a huge number of these research topics which will turn into future products, which will turn into future industries. I think we're just on the cusp of starting to really see what those opportunities are. And some of the companies that rent space in your units, I'll bet you any money, will be working on these kind of problems. So I talked about latency on Earth, I talked about connecting researchers and spin-outs and startups on Earth, but actually we need to figure out how to do an interplanetary internet. Right now, we're just at the point where NASA are about to launch a comms relay to Mars, which will use lasers. So finally we'll be communicating at the speed of light with stuff that's on Mars. Now why is that important? The Mars rovers that we've had so far, if anything goes wrong, you've got to wait several minutes to get a signal back and forth. Well, whoa, go back from the cliff edge. Has it worked? Did the signal get through? Wait, wait, wait. When we start using lasers for interplanetary communication on a large scale, then we can do it for comms around the solar system in something approaching real time. But there's much more fundamental things. No one's ever been pregnant in space. There's no children have ever been born off our planet. We've not really practiced medicine, we've not done operations. All of these things we'll probably have to learn new ways of doing. So these are huge opportunities. And my favourite one of all, which might sound a bit dull, but space law right now is essentially what you take with you. So if you go on a mission, you take your country's law with you. Well, how's that going to work? How's that going to work when we have moon bases and Mars colonies? On the International Space Station, each zone is governed by the laws of the country that contributed the bits. So you literally have like a Russian zone, an American zone, a European zone. How is this going to work when it scales up to millions of people? So space law is going to be really, really big. But I'm going to shut up now. I hope that's given you some food for thought. I hope you have a really amazing couple of days here, and I'd love to talk to you some more about this stuff. Come and catch me in the coffee break.
Martin, thank you very much.